So I was thinking about this. I got a question, and then I got some information that might feed into the question I'm going to ask.
Okay.
All right. So the question is this: how much of relationships in life do you think involves the art of negotiation?
Okay.
I'm asking that question.
You're not going to feed the information?
No, because that comes later. I want to see your response to this question first.
How much
of your interaction, like with your wife, your kids, with me, with the staff, with the guy at the convenience store, the guy at the barbershop, how much of life involves the art of negotiation?
I think it depends on your definition of negotiation.
Okay.
At the time. Because I think sometimes we think of negotiations maybe like closing a deal. Like, are we gonna, I'm gonna go into the dealership, and we might know that there is some wiggle room there. Like they know, like you as a consumer now, you know that the sticker price is a sticker price, but you know that the dealer and the consumer know that there's probably some wiggle room. They can do some different things, and so that you're going to negotiate that.
Yeah.
But I think that there's a difference in. I think there is some negotiation like that in all relationships also.
Right.
But then I also think that there's a little bit of difference in that like at the base of a negotiation, there's give and take. Like everybody can't just get 100% of what they want, right?
Right.
Like in any relationship you had, I love how you use everybody, your wife, your kids, your barber.
Right.
Like, how can everybody get 100%? And so I feel like when you think about that, it becomes that the idea of negotiating is I want 100%, you want 100%, but we've kind of entered into this realm where we know that's probably not possible.
Yeah.
But like, how can we negotiate till we both feel satisfied with the outcome? That nobody is a loser.
Yeah, I think if we think about...
Would you agree with something how I'm trying to explain it?
Yeah, you're basically saying that negotiation, and this is kind of what I mean by it, is negotiation, can we define it as a collaboration for mutual benefit?
I would think that's what you think about when you think of word negotiating anyway.
Like we're entering into a collaboration for a mutual benefit.
Right.
Like we both want to walk away. It's kind of like you go into the car dealership, you don't mind if the car dealer makes money, you just don't want him to make all his money on you.
Right.
And so I understand that there needs to be profit margin.
Yes.
And so you enter into those negotiations when my wife and I are going out to dinner, and we can only eat at one restaurant that night. And so sometimes there's some give and take, some collaboration to find a place that we can both be happy with. It might not be my first choice. It might not be her first choice, but it's the best choice for us together.
Like Abigail, who's on our staff, who we love dearly, right?
Yeah.
Her and her husband, Relly, they're fantastic. She doesn't eat but chicken as a meat.
Right.
So like we know, and all of us as a team, we're like, especially she's the only girl on our staff full time.
Right.
And so we're a bunch of men. We're meatosaurs, right? We're gonna test to meet up. But we love to be around Abigail. We love Abigail. So we're always willing to negotiate, and she's gonna win. Like that, like we're all fine with that. Like it's not gonna be equal. Like if we gotta be someplace else, that's fine. And so like also in negotiations, when I feel like in relationships, it's okay sometimes to take less.
Right.
And sometimes you want it to be even, but it's not.
I was listening to an interview with a guy who was a former FBI negotiator. That was his job.
For like hostages?
Yes.
Or just in general?
Hostages.
Oh, yeah, right.
Like if a bank robber got in and got caught, he had hostages.
Yes.
Or even like with Al-Qaeda, militants, like all that stuff. He negotiated across the board.
Okay.
Like he's professional. And it was interesting to me how much time that he had spent studying human behavior.
Okay.
And how our brains work, neurobiology, all those kinds of things. And so he was talking about one of the best negotiators he ever learned from was somebody who would sit down with in the middle of a negotiation and say, okay, let's find a place in the future where we both can be happy. And then if we agree on what that is, then let's work backwards from that to figure out how to get to that.
Exactly.
How to get to that
I love
place.
that. That's
and
fantastic.
I thought, oh man,
yeah, 100%.
that is brilliant.
Yes.
And he said that he tried that, and he said that if you can, in negotiation, if each party will state the position of the other person and then articulate what you want to say. He says, amazing what that do. There's an app called Clubhouse, which I wasn't very familiar with, but basically it's where people can get on and debate stuff. And so he did an experiment on Clubhouse where he had people who would be in favor of the Israeli position in the Israel-Palestine debate, and he had people who would be in favor of the Palestinian position. And he said, here's the rules for our discussion tonight. Because in all those, and a lot of times on Clubhouse, it can get like vitriolic and it can get like really heated. And he was trying to do an experiment to see if he could keep it from doing that in these two groups that would be very hostile towards each other.
Generally volatile.
And he said the rule is this. He said, before you can speak, he said, you have to state the position of the other person. In other words, so I would say if I was Israeli, I would say to the Palestinian, I know that you have relatives who are walking around with keys in their pocket to houses that they can never go back to. And I understand that that's hurtful for them. And then I could say my position. And so he said by doing that and requiring them to do that, basically you're acknowledging the position of the other person. You're not agreeing with them necessarily. You're not even, I wouldn't even call it empathy in the sense of what a lot of people think empathy is.
Correct.
But he was saying that if I can at least acknowledge that I understand your position, I can acknowledge it and I can vocalize it. And he said that kept that whole discussion as calm as possible, and there was no conflict at all in that. And they were each just stating the positions, and he said what it did was it created an environment of mutual collaboration. And
Correct.
that's what his goal obviously was. He said, I always wanted to operate with integrity. And he said, but like if you think about with your wife, he said, if you say to your wife, look, I want to go to this place, or I want to go play golf, whatever it is, that your wife doesn't really want you to do that day. He said there's different ways to approach that. And he said if you don't understand her position about that, then that is in and of itself, that is, okay, I want to get this, she wants something else. What's that negotiation going to, what's the end game of that negotiation? I just thought that was interesting. The more I thought about it, the more I realized, and he was trying to communicate that there's so much negotiation that goes on in your life. He said, and most people just come at it from a selfish position, and they don't have the ability to see the other person's position, to have understanding of the other person's position. And he said, like, he would go into a situation where somebody had a relative who had been kidnapped by Al-Qaeda, and that he said, and that person that was an American, they went into a place that the government had told them not to go to, and they made a choice to go, and they got kidnapped. And he said, but I didn't go in there and say that to them. He said, I went in there and I said, I know that you're angry. I know that you're hurting. I know that you're scared. I know that you think your government has abandoned you. And they were like, yeah. And he said, and then they would say, well, now what? And he said, then I could actually go to work. He said, I didn't agree with their position. I just said, I know that you are angry. I know that you feel like you. And it was just interesting to me where he said the simple acknowledgement of what somebody was actually feeling made it okay for us to be able to move forward into the next thing. And I thought about that in terms of, like, for us as pastors too. Like, we're standing up on stage on a Sunday morning, and we're trying to convince people. It's basically a negotiation.
100%.
That's taking place.
100%.
And so I'm always interested in those kinds of things. Like how do we
yes.
do that? And so I just thought that was, as I began to think about it, like how much of my life is negotiation, and how poor a job I do sometimes of stating the other person or even acknowledging their position.
Yeah, I think that, like, that's what I always try to lead with, because I feel like I'm a diplomatic person. And so for me, that's kind of what I mean by that. Like, I'm trying to always think, how can we arrive at the best place for all of us? And so I love hearing that, because that's just kind of what I think about. And I try to, I know that a lot of times you and I have to deal with some hard truths. And so we're always trying to negotiate that.
Right.
With making it palatable. Like, I kind of can remember you were talking about something today that reminded me of something else as well. Just talking about how you recently lost a dog, and that before that you were trying to give her a medicine that was really bitter.
Right.
And a lot of medicines are bitter in general.
Right.
And they add flavor to them. They try to do that because it's just hard to get down. Someone will harden our stomach. And so it's like, I think that's what we're talking about. That if the medicine creates a bitter taste and a bitter reaction, and we have like sometimes we have bitter things, we also have like a biologic reaction to almost not want it,
Right.
because we're trained that way, because back in the day bitter stuff could be poisonous, so we didn't know. So some of our taste buds, some of the way our body just naturally reacted was to keep us safe.
Right.
And so like as we moved on, that still is kind of encoded in us, right? And so we now know that, okay, we need to try to make our medicine be, if it's going to be a chewable, make sure that you can get it down.
Right. Yeah.
Make sure it doesn't taste bad because it's good for you. And when you're being diplomatic or you're negotiating, a lot of times you're trying to get to a good end result. But if you can't ever get there, if it's too bitter,
Right.
then like it's wasted medicine. And so for us as leaders, especially with Christianity, there's been a lot of times that things have been said with no tact, no decorum, no care, that has been medically true, but it has no negotiation in there.
Right.
And for me and you, like, I've always felt like, no, we need to negotiate. First of all, I feel we need to negotiate. Second of all, which is first, one of my favorite passages is God says, come, let us reason together. Isn't that beautiful?
Yeah.
Think about that. God doesn't have to reason with anybody.
Right.
He is God. I made everything. I am who I said I am. You're not even on my level. Hey, you're not that guy, right? The meme, the real. Yeah. You are not that guy because I made you.
You're not that guy,
I know you're
bro.
not.
You're not
but
that guy.
then he literally says, let's reason.
Yeah.
So like if the God of the universe is willing to reason, why would we not be willing to reason?
Yeah, and the other thing that he said was fascinating to me was there was 3 different voices like in their training. What they talked about was you can come in, and some people have the assertive voice. They're going to come in and take charge,
Like guns blazing?
Guns blazing.
Okay.
Tell you just like it is, blunt, basically.
Yes.
you know.
Yes, blunt.
And then there's the analyst
Okay.
who's going to be more quiet, who's going to be collecting information.
I wonder who I know is like that.
I wonder who you know is like that. And then there's the accommodator, who's going to be smiling all the time, and it was funny. He said like the accommodators.
I love how I'm smiling right now. Look,
Yeah.
look at what you're saying. I was like, I have a smile on my face as we're talking about it. It's like, no, I'm not accommodating at all.
But the accommodators, he said, could make they could make a lot of deals quickly, but they weren't deals that lasted.
Right.
And the assertive person couldn't make a deal as quickly because they were putting people off.
Correct.
And he said that the analyst typically had the better success because the analyst could analyze that the assertive voice wasn't working, and could see the benefit of the accommodator's congeniality and friendliness, and could assimilate what needed to be assimilated in order to get the deal done and to get the negotiation complete in a positive way for everybody else.
Yeah.
And so he was saying that his nature is to be the assertive person. And he said you can learn the other voices.
Correct.
And he said so, and I was thinking about that in terms of scripture with like the renewing of our mind and the fruits of the Spirit, and how the Spirit can help us overcome our faults.
And just leadership in general, like some stuff you can learn and add.
Right.
Yes.
You can always develop yourself.
Correct.
And learn, okay, well, if I go in this pathway, it's not healthy for what I'm actually trying to accomplish.
Yes.
Or if I go in this pathway, it may look healthy at first.
Oh, that's so good.
But it doesn't last.
I love that.
But if I go in this pathway, then I can assimilate things into from both sides. I can be assertive when I need to, but if I'm always coming across as the strong voice, then I'm going to turn people off.
But think about this. Like, I love this conversation. This is a great topic. Think about the idea of being like, so just from me looking in at this, talking about negotiation.
Right.
Every negotiation is going to be different. Okay. So the first thing you need to do is that if you are kind of a blunt, hothead, kick the door down kind of guy,
Peter.
Or
I mean, there's going to be one in every crowd, right?
Or if you're going to be a guy that's going to just be kind of like trying to smooth everything over.
Right.
The best way to start, I think, is to be an analyzer, to learn to look and stop and look.
Right.
Because the thing about, like, for Peter thought every situation would be solved by what just happened last time.
Yeah.
That was like, he wanted Rich to repeat.
Yeah.
And Jesus even was like, everything's different. It's nuanced.
Right.
Jesus was trying to say, like, hey, these spirits, they beat you up last time because you weren't prepared like you were. You went to go fight this new battle with last week's arsenal.
Right.
This battle is new, and so he wanted them to realize that. And I feel like that's the same thing. Like you've been married for what, 32 or 31?
32 years. Not days, not months.
And so I'm
but
just
years.
saying, like, I love your wife. You love your wife.
Yes.
But I'm saying, you know that, like, you have not been able to handle your wife the same way every single time.
I don't handle my wife.
But you
know what I'm saying?
I knew you were gonna say good. That was a layup. That was perfect. I knew, but you know what I meant. Like
I just serve my wife. I'm here to just. I love my wife as
I
Christ
know.
loved the church. It's sacrificial, man.
Okay. What I'm
Yeah.
saying is, your wife can present the same situation 3 times.
Yeah.
And it might require 3 different ways of dealing with it. That's what I'm trying to say. But you got to sit back and realize what's going on, because it might have been something different. It might have been a financial trigger. It might have been a health trigger.
Right.
It might have been just a tire trigger. But it might be the same. It might sound the same.
Yes, I mean,
But it's coming from 3 different places.
yeah. And when my wife and I come together about an issue,
Right.
there's her security is in her mind, like because that's kind of generally what's going to motivate her. But what's fascinating is that she doesn't understand that her security is also what motivates me.
Yes. Right.
But there's been many times where I communicated that in such an inappropriate way
Yep.
that I was the assertive, or I was way too accommodating, and I way too passive.
Yeah.
And so like
yeah.
there was many times where I just have messed that up and didn't find the right balance to be able to lovingly be there in such a way that gave us a mutual beneficial outcome. And so it's like this guy also said, he said, a yes is aspirational until you can figure out what the how is. A yes is only aspirational until you can figure out the how. He said, in other words, if you tell me yes, but we can't agree on the how, then it's just an aspiration. Like it's just a dream. And so he said negotiation is all in the details. He said, just like in your relationships at home, it's about how are we going to do this? Yeah, we're going to go to dinner, but how are we going to do that? Like how, yeah, we as a staff, we're going to move forward with this initiative, but how are we going to do that? We're going to have this launch event, or we're going to do this night of worship, whatever it is. We all say yes, but then we have to figure out the how. Because if we don't understand the how, if we can't, because there's some negotiation that goes into that too. Like the negotiation doesn't stop just because you get a yes. If you get a guy who's holding a hostage in a bank to say yes, he's going to come out. Well, okay, well, how are we going to do that? First of all, we need you to let the hostages go. Then we're going to progress out. And there's a way in which and he was saying basically he's come in a situation where, look, he tells a hostage holder, he said, my goal is for you to live.
Hey, that's a good way to say.
My goal is for you to
That's
live.
what I was gonna say.
That's
You
the point
want-
in the
you go
future
there. Yes, that
that
we
we can both agree
yes.
on, and then let's figure out
I don't want
how
you
do we
to
get there?
lose your life,
Right.
And I don't think you want to, right?
Right.
Then how can we get? Now that's what I was thinking about. Like let's
Yeah.
just step 1.
Yes.
Like before, like let one go,
Right.
Or let a few go. Like let's move forward to then getting you out safely. Exactly. I love, and that's the thing, and that's why I love, like, that. Once again, this is where I want to get to. We want to get to this place in our marriage. We want to get to this place, and I talked about this with my boys. Like, hey, can we both agree that this is what we are like? You want blah blah blah. Yeah, cool. Then how are we going to do that?
Right.
Then now once again, let's agree on the steps to get there, and then it's for everybody's mutual benefit.
Yeah.
And once again, I think like that's the key that you said, like analyzing the situation. Because it's going to be different, and I think also what you're willing to give up in the negotiation might be different as well. Like what you're willing to, like, it's not always. I think in our culture we think everything's gonna be 50-50. And the older I've gotten, I just feel like that's a bunch of baloney.
Yeah.
Like I feel like that's the biggest lie we get.
Right.
Is that everything needs to be evaluated. Because sometimes I might be willing to take 10 and give 90, and I'm happy with that.
Right.
Because it was worth that.
Right.
Does that make sense? What I'm trying to say?
because you see value in the end game,
Yes.
in the end goal.
I might right now on that particular transaction, that might be a negative to me.
Right.
But like this is where we're trying to go.
But see, here's
100%.
Here's where it all breaks down, and because he said once they figured out that there was such a thing called suicide by police.
Yes.
He said then basically
Yeah.
he said you understand that there is no, like, the you're not going to agree on the end game.
Because his end game is to have that happen.
Is to have that happen.
And he's going to force the hand that way.
And he's going to force the hand that way.
Correct.
Or like he said, like when Al Qaeda would ask for things that there was just no way they could do. Like he's just physically impossible.
And
things.
they're also forcing a hand.
And he said because they know they're going to kill the guy anyway.
Yep.
Like it's just they don't care.
And they actually want you to
they
do
actually
something
want that
bad.
because
Yes.
And so, and I think that's true in our life, in our marriages, in our parenting, and all that stuff too. Like in other words,
What do you mean? What do you mean by that?
in other words, I think there are some people that are just like I'm not willing to come to you and agree on a place in the future. I'm not willing to agree on a way in which we can see forward in this. In marriage, we've seen that in marriages. You know, one person wants to sit down at the table and negotiate a future,
that's
and the other
true.
person just says, "Look, no, I'm ready to commit suicide in this situation. I'm ready for it to be over." And no matter what you do, I don't see a place in the future where we could be together.
But don't you think that's very rare though? I mean, in our relationships. Like, because I also think when you think about our world,
right,
those type of people that do stuff like that are rare also.
Right, but I mean, it's almost like the idea that if somebody needs help, but if they don't want help, you can't help them.
I just feel like in our relationships, we're quick to blame that and say, "Well, that person's not willing to negotiate," and I think that's. I don't think I agree with that.
Okay.
I think more people are willing to negotiate. I just think that both parties have the wrong idea about what that looks like. And so since they think that I have to get everything I need, I think that's what I said. Like, it's that whole idea of 50-50 or 100-100.
Right.
And if it's not, I don't want to sit at the table with you.
Right.
And so I think you have to get that out your mind. And if you did, more people will be at the table.
So, like in that scenario, could we say that let's say a wife cheated on a husband?
Yep.
And so to get back together, that husband's going to have to give up a lot.
Oh, yeah, right.
You know, it's going to have to be,
100%, yes.
I'm willing to give my 10. Are you willing? I'm willing to give up 90.
Yes.
Are you willing to give your 10?
100%.
And then I see a place forward.
Yes.
Because that's never going to be a 50-50.
No.
When one person has cheated on the other.
That's a very good point.
And so
exactly.
I think that's what you're saying.
Yes.
Is that in some of those situations, we see such a great value in going forward that we're willing to give up more than the other person is going to have to give up more to go forward.
Yes.
In other words, if I'm going to have to forgive you, it's a greater cost to me
Yes.
than it is if you because you're just receiving forgiveness.
Yes.
And that's something you don't necessarily deserve.
But like, even to your point, like
or earn.
the point that husband, if the wife cheated on the husband, just because we're guys in this podcast, right? But either way, but if the wife cheated, and so say she does want to come back, they still have to do the same thing you said. They have to find an agreed upon place in the future.
Right.
Because at the beginning, it's going to be top heavy.
Right.
Where he's going to be giving 95% to the 5. But you can't also continue that way because you can't eventually just make that person
Right.
be unfair. It can't, like, she can't pay all that debt back and then always keep paying it back forever.
Right.
Like, it has to get to a point where it does become this way.
Amen.
To your, like, you know what I'm saying? Like, so
Yeah.
I think that's also part of that as well.
Yes.
Like, it can't. That's why it's a fascinating conversation we're having.
Yeah, because if you are constantly, if for the rest of your life you're still negotiating that point in your marriage,
Right.
then you're not going to have a healthy marriage because it does have to equal back out.
Yes.
Like it does have to even out at some point. You actually literally had to put that negotiation in the past and say that, okay, now we've actually attained that point that we agreed on. We got there.
Yes.
And so now we go forward in equal footing.
Right. Because that house is negotiated. He can't negotiate forever.
Right.
Something's going to come to term.
Right. And so I think
Yeah.
that's the thing. It's about how do we get to that place and how do we get there quickly enough
Yeah.
to where there's less cost in it and less opportunity for it to go sideways. So how do we get to that point in the future quickly enough? But I love your idea about that is that because we've seen couples in situations where one person wrongs somebody, they hurt, and then it just comes up over and over and over again.
And that kills it.
And the person who was wronged is just like they just carry it and they beat them over the head
Yes.
with it all the time.
Exactly.
And so that's really an unfair negotiation.
Yes.
I mean, you agreed to stay together.
right.
So how is the healthiest way to stay together? It's not to keep carrying that.
not.
It's to forgive and release that.
It is.
And to let it go. I mean, if we're all followers of Jesus and we understand how much we've been forgiven and how God just overlooks our sin because of the righteousness of Jesus, and then he moves forward. It's always forward
Yep.
with God. And so I think as we negotiate in our relationships, it has to be the same way.